The conference room was cold, but it wasn't the air conditioning that made Ava shiver. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and her boss Raymond didn't even look up as he spoke. Raymond said, "You're not leadership material, Ava. You just don't have that presence." Ava blinked. The room tilted slightly. It wasn't shock, it was the humiliation boiling up her throat. She had worked late nights, led 3 successful projects, and mentored 2 interns who were now team leads. But none of that mattered. She wasn't seen. Raymond leaned back, folding his arms as if he was already done with her future. Ava tried to speak, but the lump in her throat held her words hostage. He continued, "I'm reassigning you. You'll report to Jeremy now, he's got the right spark." Ava clenched her hands in her lap. Jeremy? He was new, barely 6 months in, and had once asked her how to run a client call. She looked around. 4 walls, a gray carpet, a fake plant in the corner. This was her battlefield, and she was losing without even swinging. She stood up slowly, her voice low but steady. Ava said, "Thank you for your feedback." She walked out. But in her heart, something cracked, then caught fire. The office buzzed outside the glass room, but inside Ava's world was silent, spinning in shame. At her desk, she stared blankly at the blinking cursor on her screen. The words wouldn't come. Her thoughts tangled with Raymond's voice replaying in her mind. Not leadership material. The phrase rang with cruel finality, branding her like a scar. She remembered the weekend work, the missed birthdays, the mornings she arrived before sunrise. None of it mattered now. People passed behind her glass wall, laughing, chatting, untouched by her quiet unraveling. Her inbox filled up with tasks from Jeremy, poorly written, vaguely directed. It was insulting. Ava clenched her jaw and typed anyway. Not because she wanted to, but because rage, when buried, turns into quiet discipline. She would not quit. Not yet. If they couldn't see her strength, she'd sharpen it in silence. This was no longer about being chosen. This was about earning her power in plain sight. 2 days passed, and Ava said little. She nodded, smiled, completed tasks, but her silence wasn't defeat. It was strategy. Every time Jeremy gave her a condescending task, she delivered it faster, better, sharper. She listened in meetings, watching how decisions flowed, where gaps formed, who hesitated. She noted how Raymond ignored risk indicators, how Jeremy buckled under pressure. At night, she studied leadership courses, not because she wasn't one, but because she would become undeniable. She began keeping notes, problems no one solved, ideas no one saw. And quietly, she started solving them. Her colleagues noticed. "Did Ava fix this again?" one whispered. Ava didn't respond. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Her silence was a storm gathering. It wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming the version of herself that would never be questioned again. Jeremy fumbled in another team meeting, stumbling over metrics Ava had delivered earlier. He glossed over key issues she had raised in private, then pitched her ideas as his own. Ava remained silent, her face unreadable. Her teammates exchanged glances, their expressions betraying what they now understood. Still, Ava said nothing. Let him dig the hole. After the meeting, her colleague Priya leaned in and whispered, "He's nothing without your notes." Ava simply nodded. She wasn't here for credit. Not yet. But her patience was a fuse burning towards something seismic. By Friday, Ava sat quietly in a one-on-one meeting with HR TAR. "We've heard concerns about how your skills are being used," the woman said gently. Ava didn't flinch. The seeds she'd planted were sprouting. Others had noticed. The HR rep smiled, cautious but intrigued. "Would you consider applying for the Open Strategy Director role?" Ava didn't show it, but lightning cracked through her chest. This wasn't vindication yet, but it was a beginning. She left that room not with hope, but purpose. The climb had started. Ava walked into the office Monday morning with a strange calm. The hallway felt narrower, the air crisper. As she passed by Jeremy's desk, he avoided her gaze. Something had shifted. She wasn't being overlooked anymore. She was being observed. Whispers that once slid past her now stopped when she entered. Colleagues who once called her too intense now asked for her input before meetings. Priya passed her a note. "You're starting something." Ava folded it into her pocket like a secret weapon. She didn't smile. There wasn't time for that. She had started documenting team inefficiencies, rewriting processes Jeremy had bungled. Not publicly, yet. Just proof. Ammunition. She stayed late without needing to. She wasn't trying to impress anymore. She was preparing for something bigger. Every day she wasn't acknowledged was another brick in the foundation she was building. This wasn't survival now. It was strategy. In the break room, Ava overheard Jeremy complaining to another manager about her being too eager. "She's trying too hard," he muttered, unaware she stood just around the corner. Ava didn't move. His words didn't sting like before. They were confirmation. He was rattled. At her desk, Ava finished the draft of a proposal Jeremy had shelved for weeks, a plan that could save the company thousands on operational costs. She submitted it quietly through the internal review system. No name, no credit, just results. By the time the director read it, she was called into a follow-up discussion. Jeremy hadn't even noticed it had gone live. She didn't gloat. She explained the logic, pointed to the data, and held herself like she was already at that next level. She didn't speak to be liked. She spoke to be heard. And she was. That afternoon, Ava was called into a cross-departmental brainstorming session by the director of strategy himself. "We need problem solvers. Your name kept coming up," he said. Ava nodded, taking a seat. This was new territory, not granted. Earned. Around the table sat senior leads, men and women who once barely noticed her. Now they waited for her thoughts. Ava didn't hesitate. She spoke clearly, backing every idea with data. No grandstanding. No fluff. Afterward, one senior manager pulled her aside and said, "It's refreshing to hear someone who actually does the work." She walked back to her desk slower this time. Not from exhaustion, but from recognition that the game was changing. And this time, she wasn't just a piece on the board. She was shaping it. Jeremy stood awkwardly at the end of the day, holding a printout of the proposal Ava had submitted. "You didn't tell me you were working on this," he said, his voice tight. Ava replied, "It was just something I'd been piecing together after hours." He nodded stiffly, jaw tight. "Well, nice work." His tone was flat, but his eyes were wary. That night, Ava stayed behind again, not because she had to, but because she was becoming addicted to this quiet evolution. She didn't need credit to know she was building something. She looked out the window, city lights blinking like stars. The fire Raymond lit that day in the conference room hadn't dimmed. It had only focused. If they thought she'd fade quietly, they were terribly mistaken. The strategy director emailed her directly. "Would love for you to present that proposal at the executive review next week." Ava stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keys. She had wanted this for so long, but never like this, not through stealth, not through fire. But here it was. She typed back a single line, "I'd be honored." Then she exhaled. This wasn't the end goal. It wasn't even revenge. It was a door cracked open, and she was walking through it with her spine straight and her voice ready. For years, they told her she was too quiet, too intense, too methodical. Now, they were listening, and she was just getting started. Ava stood before the executive panel, her hands steady as they wrapped around the remote. The lights dimmed slightly as her deck appeared on the screen. She didn't flinch. This was the moment she'd rehearsed 100 times in her small apartment. Her voice didn't quiver. It landed with weight. She laid out facts, drew clean lines between inefficiency and impact, wove metrics with insight. The room stayed quiet, but not in dismissal, in concentration. Every time she clicked forward, she saw a nod, A scribbled note, a raised brow. And there, in the corner, sat Raymond, watching, arms folded, jaw tense. She didn't look at him again. She wasn't here for him. She was here to lead. At the end, the director leaned forward and said, "This is executive-level thinking." Ava simply nodded. Inside, her ribs trembled with the force of holding back years of silence. But on the outside, she was unshakable. Back at her desk, Ava pulled out the old rejection email from 2 years ago, the one Raymond had marked with, "Not ready for leadership." She stared at it like a ghost from another life. That version of her had questioned everything. Now, she folded the printed sheet once, then again, and tucked it into her drawer, not as a scar, but as a record. Growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in late nights, unanswered emails, and quiet resolve. She opened her task list, dozens of team inefficiencies she'd logged over weeks. She began forwarding solutions to department heads, not for glory, but because she now had something more powerful than revenge. She had credibility. Earned. Proven. Nine. Ava wasn't building a name. She was building momentum. Jeremy approached her desk that afternoon, his face a cocktail of forced confidence and veiled panic. "Hey, I noticed your name came up on the budget revisions. You want to run that by me first?" Ava looked up slowly. "It's already approved by finance," she said. He blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't hostile, just factual. He stood there, unsure how to assert control when she no longer deferred to it. The imbalance hung awkwardly between them. Ava didn't fill the silence. Jeremy eventually muttered, "Okay, cool," and walked away. It was a small moment, but Ava felt it. The scales had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't asking for space, she was occupying it. That night, Ava walked home beneath flickering street lamps, the city humming with weekend energy. Her steps were heavy, not from defeat, but from everything she carried quietly. Ambition, exhaustion, clarity. She passed a bookstore window and paused, catching her reflection. Not the tired assistant, not the overlooked analyst, but a woman in transition. The fire in her hadn't dulled, it had refined. She thought of the boardroom, of Jeremy's shrinking posture, of Raymond's narrowed eyes. She thought of her own silence, and how powerful it had become. And there, on the sidewalk, she smiled. Not wide, not showy, but with the knowing of someone who has found her center. She was still climbing, but now, the ground beneath her felt like hers. Sunday morning, Ava sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, papers spread around her like a war map. She was drafting a proposal for a leadership pipeline program, one that would find and support voices like hers. She paused, pen in hand, eyes focused. This wasn't for HR, not yet. It was for herself. A reminder that leadership isn't bestowed, it's forged. She remembered all the times she'd swallowed her words, quieted her instincts, dimmed her ideas. Never again. This proposal would be her next statement, not of intent, but of impact. She wasn't just preparing for a promotion. She was architecting a future where women like her wouldn't have to ask to be seen. They'd be expected. Ava's proposal landed on the CEO's desk by Monday afternoon. It had been routed through the director of strategy, tagged as urgent insight worth reviewing. Ava had written it not just with logic, but with conviction. Measured, evidence-backed, and quietly revolutionary. By Wednesday, her name was on the agenda for the leadership town hall. She didn't ask how. She already knew. In less than a week, her framework for internal mentorship was now a topic at the highest level. The ripple had become a wave. Raymond passed her in the hallway and muttered, "Big moves," but she didn't stop to acknowledge it. She didn't need his words anymore. The spotlight wasn't something she chased. It had turned on her because she had become impossible to ignore. She hadn't changed. They had finally started to see. At the town hall, Ava stood before over 100 employees, her slides minimal, her message clear. Talent doesn't look one way, it doesn't speak at one volume. Leadership isn't noise, it's clarity. The room was still, alert. Ava spoke not to impress, but to inspire. She shared how overlooked voices cost the company innovation, and how investing in hidden potential could triple its value. Her voice didn't shake. Her spine didn't bend. She owned that stage like she'd been born for it. And when she finished, the room didn't just clap, they rose. Standing ovation. Raymond clapped too, but it was slower, more performative. Ava didn't look at him. This applause wasn't validation. It was confirmation. Her silence had spoken. Now her voice echoed. The following week, Ava's calendar filled with meeting requests from senior leadership. They wanted to pick her brain, hear more, collaborate. She accepted only a few. She knew the difference between curiosity and commitment. Instead, she reached out to interns, junior analysts, the ones who reminded her of herself. She started hosting closed mentorship circles during lunch breaks. They weren't formal, not yet. But they were full. Every chair taken. She spoke less about success and more about systems, how to understand them, bend them, and eventually lead through them. And when she saw the spark ignite in one girl's eyes, she knew this was no longer about climbing. She was building stairs for others. During a leadership retreat, Ava was invited to co-lead a panel on strategic visioning. Raymond sat in the second row, no longer a speaker, just a spectator. When she walked onto the stage, he raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak. She presented models that contradicted his past strategies, calmly, with data and clarity. No venom. Just facts. The room leaned into her ideas, nodding, scribbling. Ava didn't gloat. She had learned that real power doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. And in that moment, Raymond realized he was no longer at the center of the room. She was. And she wasn't there to replace him. She was there to redefine the space entirely. The HR head approached Ava the following week with a quiet offer. "We're restructuring. Raymond's stepping down. We'd like you to lead the division." Ava didn't answer immediately. She let the silence hold. Not for effect, but because she was weighing not if she deserved it, but if it aligned with the woman she was becoming. She nodded once. "Let's talk terms." Later that night, she stood alone on her balcony, city lights glowing like embers. Not triumphant, not loud, just still. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Her title hadn't changed who she was. It had simply caught up with who she'd already become. The announcement went live at noon. Ava Singh appointed as division head of strategic operations. Her inbox flooded in minutes. Some emails were genuine congratulations. Others felt forced, curt lines from people who once dismissed her. Among them was one from Raymond. "Congratulations. Let me know how I can support the transition." She stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without replying. That wasn't bitterness. That was clarity. She had nothing to prove to him. Later that day, in the elevator, they stood side by side. Raymond said, "Funny how things turn out." Ava didn't smile. She said, "I've worked for this a long time." He nodded, said nothing more. The elevator doors opened, and for the first time she stepped out before him. A week into her new role, Ava called a full team meeting. The same room where Raymond had once told her she lacked leadership presence was now hers to command. She stood at the head of the table, employees lined on either side, some familiar, some new. "We're not doing power plays anymore," she began. "We're doing results, we're doing people, and we're doing integrity." The silence was heavy, but not resistant. It was attention. Raymond sat near the back, his hands folded, face unreadable. Ava didn't address him. She didn't need to. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the future she was here to lead, and how she would never let another voice like hers be ignored again. Over coffee, Ava met with the CEO for a debrief. "You've made waves," he said, sipping slowly. "Not everyone is comfortable with it." Ava smiled. "Change isn't about comfort. It's about course correction. He chuckled. You're not what they expected. Ava nodded. That's why it worked. Their conversation wasn't about reassurance. It was about alignment. She wasn't asking for permission. She was building systems, processes, cultures. In her first act, she rolled out a mentorship matching program. In the second, she initiated an anonymous innovation channel. Quiet voices had been buried for years. Not anymore. The CEO stood, offered his hand. Make this count. I. Ava shook it. I already am. In her first executive roundtable, Ava noticed the tone shift immediately. People listened when she spoke, not just politely, but eagerly. She noticed how some avoided eye contact with Raymond now, deferring subtly to her. He noticed too. During the break he approached her. If I made things harder for you, Ava held up her hand. You don't have to say anything. She wasn't cruel. She was finished. With the past. With needing apologies. Just don't do it to the next one, she said. That landed harder than silence. She turned and rejoined the room, leaving him standing alone with the weight of his own history. Growth wasn't always graceful, but it was necessary. That evening, Ava stayed late in her new office. Same building, same walls, but everything felt different. On her desk sat a gift bag. No card. Inside was a framed quote, "Leadership isn't a title, it's impact." She didn't know who left it. Maybe Priya. Maybe no one. She placed it on the shelf above her desk. Then she turned off the lights and sat in the silence. No celebration. No loud declarations. Just a moment. A breath. The long road behind her. And the longer one ahead. She had risen without rage. Without shortcuts. Without playing their game. Now it was her turn to rewrite the rules. Quietly. Powerfully. Permanently. Ava's first major initiative as division head launched on a quiet Monday. A cross-departmental leadership lab. It wasn't flashy. No corporate jargon. Just real development, mentorship, shadowing, accountability. In less than a week, sign-ups tripled projections. Her inbox filled with notes from mid-level staff who finally felt seen. One line stuck out. "This is the first time I've believed I could lead." Ava smiled. Not because it flattered her, but because it proved what she already knew. Talent isn't rare, it's overlooked. Jeremy requested to join the second cohort. She approved it without hesitation. Growth wasn't gate-kept under her leadership. Even the ones who doubted her had a place. But they'd have to do the work. Ava didn't lead with memory of who doubted her. She led with the vision of what could be built when no one is silenced. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly performance dashboards, Ava noticed a subtle pattern. Teams mentored under her new program outperformed legacy groups by double digits. It wasn't just morale. It was results. She called a quick meeting with senior leads. Raymond was among them, now in an advisory role. She presented the data, then stepped back. "This isn't about one person," she said. "It's about what happens when we build systems that amplify instead of stifle." For the first time, Raymond didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He simply nodded. And that was the real shift. Not Ava proving herself, but the room finally realizing she never had to. She had simply been ahead. The CEO stopped by Ava's office unannounced. "We're restructuring corporate leadership tiers," he said. "I want you to sit in on succession planning next quarter." Ava nodded slowly. A year ago, she wouldn't have even known this room existed. Now she was part of shaping who entered it next. Later that evening, she scribbled a line in her journal. "Power isn't just who holds the mic, it's who gets handed the script." She knew her rise wasn't typical, but it wouldn't be rare anymore. Her voice was no longer the outlier, it was becoming the standard. She wasn't the exception. She was the signal. Weeks later, during a firm-wide strategy summit, Ava was the keynote speaker. She stood under a spotlight that once terrified her. She didn't speak in quotes or corporate slogans. She told her story, not in anger but in precision. "We reward visibility over impact," she said. "Let's change that." The audience leaned forward. Phones stayed pocketed. Even the usual cynics listened. She wasn't just a leader now. She was a movement. By the end of the talk, she wasn't clapped off stage. She was walked off by the CEO himself. And somewhere in the crowd, Jeremy clapped hardest. Late at night, Ava sat alone in the office. Lights low, city glowing through the windows. She didn't feel powerful. She felt clear. She reflected on every silent setback, every buried win, every moment she questioned herself. Now she knew. Power had never been out there. It had been inside her all along. The titles, the applause, the wins, they weren't the reward. The reward was looking in the mirror and no longer doubting what she saw. For the first time, she saw not just a survivor, not just a leader, but a woman who rewrote the story. No one expected her to even speak in. It had been 6 months since Ava took over the division. The culture had shifted, not radically, but intentionally. Meetings were more collaborative. Voices once silenced now led discussions. Promotions reflected value, not volume. Ava walked through the office, nodding to colleagues who once barely acknowledged her. The change wasn't loud, it hummed beneath the surface. Raymond's desk had moved. He now worked under Ava's supervision, contributing quietly. He no longer competed. He complied. Yep. Some would call that justice. Ava called it structure. This wasn't about watching others fall. It was about building something that lasted. As she passed the mirror in the hallway, she paused, not to fix her hair or straighten her shirt, but to see, truly see, the leader she had become. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she claimed it and wore it without apology. During a mentoring session, a young analyst asked her, "How did you deal with being underestimated?" Ava didn't rush the answer. She looked at the girl, maybe 23, hopeful, still unsure of her worth. Ava smiled softly. "I stopped waiting for recognition and started building receipts." The room was silent. Then, nods. That sentence wasn't rehearsed. It was lived. Ava didn't speak like a motivational poster. She spoke like someone who had buried doubt in discipline. Later, the girl approached her and whispered, "Thank you for making me believe I could belong here." Ava placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already do." Legacy wasn't in plaques or emails. It lived in moments like this. Small, human, unshakable. Ava found herself back in the original conference room, the one where it all began. The fake plant still sat in the corner, but the power in the space had changed. She wasn't summoned there. She owned the meeting. As people filed in, she reflected on the journey, how many times she doubted, how many times she hadn't been seen. But now, every chair turned toward her voice. She didn't need to prove anything, but she did need to protect what she built. Because power is fragile when hoarded, and unshakable when shared. As she opened her laptop, she whispered to herself, "Never again small." Raymond requested a final one-on-one. Not formal, just a conversation. He sat across from Ava, older now, not in years, but in recognition. "I didn't see you then," he said. "I see you now." Ava gave a measured nod. "Thank you," she replied. And she meant it, not for the apology, but for the acknowledgement. Closure doesn't always come clean. Sometimes it comes in tired eyes and quiet regrets. She stood up and offered her hand. Raymond shook it. No resentment, just history. That chapter had ended. Ava wasn't stuck in it. She was already several pages ahead. She left the room without looking back. Ava sat alone in her office late that Friday night, fingers hovering over her keyboard. She was drafting a memo, one she'd never sent. It read, "To every woman who's been told she's not enough, you are. You always were." She closed the file and smiled. Her phone buzzed. A message from Priya. "Look how far you've come." Ava stared at it for a moment, then replied, "This is just the beginning." She stood, turned off the lights, and stepped into the hallway. The office was silent, but inside Ava, the voice that once begged to be heard was now roaring, and this time, the world was listening.